Hey everyone, we're back with another tier list. This time we're doing the Beatles, and same deal as last time. I'm going to go through each album from beginning to end and score them on this list, with S being the highest and D being the lowest. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, seeing where we agree and disagree, so please feel free to leave some comments. And if I get any information wrong on any of these albums, please let me know in the comments and I'll correct them. Obviously, I don't want to put any false information out there. So, yeah, that's about it. Let's just jump right into it. Their first album is Please Please Me, and I'm going to give this a B. I like this album a lot. I think it's really great for a first release. It's got a nice blend of a few different styles that create a really solid framework for them to continue off of in their future albums. You're getting a nice combination of bubblegum pop, along with some ballads, and then a few bluesy tracks, and also a couple of more just straight ahead rock tracks as well. There's also a fair amount of covers, which is typical of a lot of the Beatles' earlier albums. On this one, we have 6 covers, which are Anna, Go to Him, Chains, Boys, Baby It's You, A Taste of Honey, and Twist and Shout, and then the remaining 8 are all originals. The first side is giving you a little bit of each of those styles that I had mentioned. It opens with I Saw Her Standing There, which is one of the more driving rock and roll tracks on the album. And then you get Misery, which is probably more in the bubblegum pop category. And then it continues with Anna, Go to Him, which slows things down a bit and gets more into the ballad territory. The 4th and 5th tracks are Chains and Boys, which both have more of a bluesy feel to them. Boys is more of an upbeat blues that has Ringo Starr doing lead vocals for the first time. And then Chains is another blues, but it's done in more of a relaxed tempo. The last 2 tracks of the first side are probably my favorite songs on the album, with Ask Me Why and then the title track, Please Please Me. Ask Me Why is a very pretty John Lennon song with these beautiful vocal harmonies that show you some of the more doo-wop and soul influences that he had from artists like Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. And then Please Please Me is another beautiful John Lennon song that was modified by George Martin to give it more of an upbeat pop feel to it. Apparently, it was originally written as a slower, bluesy, Roy Orbison type of song, and then George Martin tweaked the tempo a bit and gave it that feel that we know and hear on the record. One thing that I love about this song, and something that I love about a lot of the earlier Beatles work, is their use of the harmonica. I love the touch that the harmonica adds, where they have these short, pretty melodies that they play in between the sections of the song, and you can hear this in Please Please Me, Love Me Do, and There's a Place. And it's a sound that I really enjoy, and I think stylistically it's perfect for the kind of stuff that they're doing on their earlier albums. The second side opens up strong with Love Me Do, which is actually the first Beatles song that I ever heard as a kid. It's another poppier song with really pretty vocal harmonies and a nice catchy melody. And then after that it goes to P.S. I Love You, which is a really pretty mid-tempo love song written by Paul McCartney. After that, they bring things down a bit with a beautiful ballad called Baby It's You. George Martin plays the Celesta very briefly towards the end of this song, and I believe a Celesta is just some sort of modified keyboard, almost similar to a prepared piano. And I love the use of this instrument. I think it really gives you a little taste of George Martin's creative input that we'll see continue to evolve more and more as the albums go on. After that, it goes to Do You Want to Know a Secret?, which is another pretty song that features George Harrison on lead vocals for the first time, which is a good thing. And then next it goes to A Taste of Honey, which is a 3/4 ballad in a minor key, which makes it balance out really well with the other ballad on this side, which was Baby It's You. The next song is There's a Place, which is probably my 3rd favorite song from this album. I just think it's very beautiful, and it has everything that I like in one song. It's got the really pretty vocal harmonies, a beautiful chord progression, and it has that harmonica that plays those little brief melodies in between the sections like we had talked about. The album concludes with Twist and Shout, which I would say is probably the most bubblegum pop song on the album, and is also actually probably my least favorite song on here, mostly just because I've heard it just way too many times throughout my life, so I'm kind of just tired of it at this point. Not that I think it's a bad song, it's just one of those songs that I've just heard way too many times. But all in all, I think this is a very good first album for the Beatles for all the reasons that I laid out, and this is going to get a B. Next, we have With the Beatles, and I'm going to give this one a C. I do like this one, but I definitely like the first album a little bit more. With this one, I really love the first side, and then the second side is kind of hit or miss for me. It's got a couple of songs that I really like, and then a couple that I don't really care for. Once again, we have 6 cover songs, which are Till There Was You, Please Mr. Postman, Roll Over Beethoven, You Really Got a Hold on Me, Devil in Her Heart, and Money, That's What I Want, with the remaining 8 being originals. Side 1 opens up with It Won't Be Long, which is a really nice driving rock and roll song that brings the album in nicely, and then it continues with a beautiful ballad called All I've Gotta Do. They then continue with All My Lovin', which is a similar vibe to the opening track with that really driving rock and roll vibe, and this is probably the most popular song on the album. And then we get Don't Bother Me, which is actually the first song that George Harrison wrote for the band, which is a very positive thing in my opinion. I think George Harrison's writing has a very distinctive sound, and it's really great to hear songs like this where you hear him in his early stages of that writing. Then we get to Little Child, which is the only song on side 1 that I'm not crazy about. It's more of a straightforward blues, and for me personally, a lot of the Beatles blues stuff never really did much for me, and it's probably just because if I was in a blues mood, the Beatles aren't typically the first band that I would go to for it. And that's just a stylistic preference on my part, and I know a lot of people do like the Beatles blues stuff, and that's totally fine. But that's going to have a lot to do with the songs that I dislike on side 2, and it's also going to pop up more and more in these next couple albums. So I figured I would just establish that, just so you know where I'm coming from in these future albums. Next we have Till There Was You, which is probably one of my favorite cover songs that I've ever heard the Beatles do. This is probably their jazziest song up to this point, and I love the instrumentation on this. You have George and John using nylon string guitars for the first time, and then Ringo is doing the bongos. And the combination creates a really nice, relaxed vibe that I really enjoy in this song. Then the side ends with Please Mr. Postman, which has some of those more, doo-wop and soul influences like we had talked about with Ask Me Why. And I think it's a very good side. I think it's really similar to Please Please Me, where it has that nice blend of a few different styles, and it really just keeps the momentum going really well. Side 2 opens up with Roll Over Beethoven, which is a song I never really cared for whatever reason. And then we get to Hold Me Tight, which was originally actually recorded for Please Please Me, but it didn't end up getting included, so they put it on this album. Next we have You Really Got a Hold on Me, which is probably my favorite song on this side. It's a really pretty minor ballad with this really nice chord progression and these really beautiful vocal harmonies. I really like this one a lot. And then next we have 2 songs that I've never really cared for, with I Wanna Be Your Man and Devil in Her Heart. I probably like Devil in Her Heart a little bit more, but for whatever reason both of these songs never really stuck out to me. Then we have Not a Second Time, which is another really pretty song. Probably my second favorite on this side. I really like the mood of this song. To me, it's always been kind of somewhere in between happy and sad, which is really interesting and a really cool effect that I think they achieve. Then the album wraps up with Money, That's What I Want, which is another one that I've never been crazy about for whatever reason. I really like the opening piano part, but other than that, the song has never really done that much for me. But like I said, for me, the second side makes this album slightly worse than Please Please Me. But I still do think it is a solid album, and it has a lot of beautiful songs on it, so I'm going to give this one a C. Next we have A Hard Day's Night, and I'm also going to give this one a C. A lot of what I said about With the Beatles will also apply to this one. I like the first side a lot, and then the second side has a couple of songs that kind of lose it for me. There are a couple of really cool things happening on here though. This is their first album to feature no covers. But that isn't a permanent change yet. They will go back to that. And it's also the first album where George Harrison started using 12-string guitars. So I appreciate the evolution in the instrumentation as well. It opens up with the title track, A Hard Day's Night, which is actually probably my least favorite song on the first side. Probably just because it's another one of those songs that I've just heard way too many times at this point in my life. Then we have I Should Have Known Better, which is a really nice mid-tempo song. I always thought the vocal melody on this one was really catchy, and I love the little solo part where George Harrison plays the vocal melody on the guitar. This is also the only song to feature the harmonica, so they're slowly starting to fade the harmonica more and more out of their sound. Then it goes to If I Fell, which is a song I've always really liked. It's got some interesting chords in the opening section, and it has some beautiful vocal harmonies throughout the song as well. Then we have I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. One cool thing about this song is Ringo is using an African drum, so it's cool to see the evolution in the percussion section as well. Then we have And I Love Her, which is probably my favorite track on the album. It's a nice, relaxing ballad with George using the nylon string guitar and Ringo using the clave and the bongos. And the combination of these instruments mixed with Paul's really beautiful vocal work creates a really nice mood. I've always loved this song. Side 1 ends with two classic hits, Tell Me Why and Can't Buy Me Love. I like both of them, maybe not as much as some of the other songs, but I do think they are solid hits. As you can probably tell, a lot of times I tend to gravitate towards a lot of the deep cuts with a lot of these earlier albums. The second side opens up with Anytime at All, which is a really nice driving rock song that brings everything in nicely. And then we have I'll Cry Instead, which has always been kind of just one of those songs that I skip over. I was never crazy about it for whatever reason. Then we have Things We Said Today, which is my second favorite track on here. I really love the vibe of this song. It's very chill and relaxed, but also slightly mysterious at the same time, which creates a really interesting mood and something that sounds very different from a lot of their other songs up to this point, in my opinion. Then we have two songs that I'm not crazy about with When I Get Home and You Can't Do That. Although I will say that I do like the cowbell in You Can't Do That because, why not? Everyone loves cowbell. The album ends on a strong note with a gorgeous song called I'll Be Back, which actually might be tied with Things We Said Today for my second favorite song on here. I love the vocal melody, and the overall mood of the song is just great. It has some really interesting chord changes, where the tonality is alternating between a major and a minor key, which creates this really interesting sound that really catches your ear. Just an amazing way to end the album. So all in all, I do think this is still a great album, but like I said, the second side has a few songs that kind of lost it for me, but the good songs I would say definitely outweigh the bad ones for sure. So yeah, this one is going to get a C. Now we get to Beatles For Sale, and I'm going to give this one a D. This is my least favorite up to this point. It still has a lot of songs that I do like, but it definitely has the most songs that I don't care for of all the albums. They're back to doing covers again, and on this one we have 6 covers with Rock and Roll Music, Mr. Moonlight, Kansas City Hey Hey Hey, Words of Love, Honey Don't, and Everyone's Trying to Be My Baby, with the remaining 8 being originals, obviously. It opens up with No Reply, which actually might be my favorite song on side 1, and maybe even my favorite song that they've opened an album with up to this point. The other 3 open up with much more driving rock songs, and this one is a little bit more laid back, and I really do appreciate the contrast that they did. But unfortunately, after this one, we have a string of songs that I'm not crazy about with I'm a Loser, Babies in Black, and Rock and Roll Music. But I do love the next song, which is I'll Follow the Sun, which is a beautiful ballad written by Paul McCartney. We have the acoustic guitar mixed in with some percussion, and it just creates a really relaxed mood, and I tend to like almost any Beatles song that's done in that style. Then we have Mr. Moonlight, which is another song that I'm not crazy about, unfortunately, but I do appreciate the fact that they are using a Hammond organ. I like how each album you can see new instruments being introduced, which obviously has a lot to do with George Martin's creative input. Then the side wraps up with another blues called Kansas City Hey Hey Hey, which, as you can probably tell by now, is not one of my favorites on this side. So unlike the previous 2 albums, this is the first one where there's a good amount of songs on side 1 that I don't care for, and unfortunately that continues into the second side as well. Side 2 opens with 8 Days a Week, which is another one of those songs that I'm just kind of burnt out on at this point. I've just heard it way too many times. And then we have 2 more songs that I'm really not crazy about with Words of Love and Honey Don't. One pattern that I did notice is that almost all of the songs that I don't like on here are covers. So, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a sign that their writing has gotten good enough to the point where they really don't need to rely on doing any covers and they can just do strictly original stuff, which is what ends up happening fairly soon. Next, we have Every Little Thing, which is one of only 2 songs that I actually like on this side. It's not one of my favorites, but I do think that it stands out compared to the majority of the other songs on this side. Then we have I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, which is more of a country kind of vibe, and similar to what I said with the blues songs, it's just not really a style that I'm looking for from the Beatles. They execute it well, but for me personally, if I want to listen to stuff like that, I would just prefer to listen to other artists and just, listen to the Beatles for all of the other great stuff that they've done so far on these 4 albums. Then we have What You Were Doing, which is the other song that I do enjoy from this side. It's got a nice vocal melody, and I really like the piano parts that George Martin added to it. Then we end with another blues called Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, which is a disappointing end to the album, in my opinion, but luckily we're only going to be going up from here, so, it's really not the end of the world. And yeah, this one gets a D. All right, now we get to Help, and I'm going to give this one a B. This album is very solid. There's a lot of new things going on here, and I think you can hear little hints of Rubber Soul here and there. You definitely know that it's on the horizon. It opens up with the title track, Help, which is a classic, and then it goes into The Night Before, which has a really catchy vocal melody and just an overall really solid rock song. Then they bring things down a bit with You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, which is more of a folk sort of vibe, but I don't mind it as much because in this case it's more relaxed and subdued, and it has some really pretty guitar chords. Then we get to my favorite song on here called I Need You. This is one of two songs that George wrote for this album, and I just love George's writing so much. Everything he writes is just so beautiful. And after that, we have Another Girl, which is the only song that I don't care for on this side. But then it's followed by my second favorite track on here called You're Gonna Lose That Girl. This one has such a beautiful vocal melody with background harmonies against a really pretty chord progression, which is everything that I love from the Beatles. Side 1 wraps up with Ticket to Ride, which is a classic. I love the sound of the 12-string guitar at the beginning, and this is one of those songs where I feel like you can hear some hints of Rubber Soul in here, just with the overall mix and just the sound that's created with the instrumentation that they're using. Side 2 starts with Act Naturally, which is more of a country vibe, probably my least favorite song on here. And then we have It's Only Love, which has a really beautiful descending chord progression with a catchy vocal melody on top of it. I've always loved that song. And then we have the second song that George wrote called You Like Me Too Much. I love the electric piano sound on this one, and like I said, I pretty much love every song that George writes. Then we have Tell Me What You See, which isn't a song that I was ever crazy about, but I do like the fact that we have more Latin percussion going on here between the clave and the güiro. Next we go to I've Just Seen a Face, which is more of an upbeat country vibe, but for whatever reason I've always liked this one. It's probably the combination of the beautiful vocal harmonies with the fast acoustic strumming against the brushes and the snare drum. Then we have Yesterday, which is a beautiful ballad and a classic Beatles hit. This is the first song to feature a string section, which just adds such a beautiful touch to the song, and I feel like this is the start of George Martin's creative genius really coming into fruition. The album then wraps up with Dizzy Miss Lizzy, which was kind of a disappointing end to me. I think it would have been way better if they just ended it with Yesterday on that really mellow, pretty note, rather than doing Yesterday and then going into an upbeat blues. I feel like the moods kind of conflict a little too much, at least for me. But regardless of that, I think this album is amazing. It has a lot of new exciting things that were going on, and it definitely makes the listener anticipate what's to come in the future albums. So this one gets a B. Alright, now we get to Rubber Soul, and this one is definitely going to get an S. I love this album. It's not my number one favorite, but it's definitely up there for sure. I think most people regard this as a breakthrough album for the Beatles for a variety of reasons. The music definitely takes a shift from the poppier sound of the previous albums into like a much more mature and conscious sounding album. If you compare their sound from Please Please Me up to this point, it's clear that their songwriting has gone through an evolution, and I would say that this album kind of shows us the foundation of the new Beatles that we're going to hear in the future albums. To me, it sounds like now they're writing songs more for the sake of expressing themselves creatively and less so for the purpose of just pumping out hit songs. Up to this point, almost all of their songs have either been about love or romance, and now on here they actually begin to take some turns into some different subject matters. The instrumentation also continues to get more experimental, and from this point on, they stop doing covers altogether and just deliver us albums with all original material, other than one exception on Let It Be. Right off the gate, on side 1, they hit you with two classics, Drive My Car and Norwegian Wood, which give the album just such an amazing start. On Norwegian Wood, you can hear George Harrison incorporating the sitar, which is an instrument that he had been studying with Ravi Shankar. And I love the addition of this instrument to the group. It definitely adds a little bit more of a psychedelic sound. The album continues with You Won't See Me, which is an amazing song Paul McCartney wrote about a troubled relationship, which is a topic that I feel like they wouldn't have really explored in previous albums. Then we have my second favorite song on here, Nowhere Man, which is a beautiful song that John Lennon actually wrote about himself after spending hours unsuccessfully trying to come up with another song for Rubber Soul. This is one of their first personal songs that's completely devoid of any mentions of love or romance. The album continues with Think for Yourself, which is another really great George Harrison number. This one is very cool instrumentally as well. Up to this point, it's probably the most distorted the guitar and bass parts have ever been, and it goes along with a really cool drum groove that combines the drum kit along with the maracas and the tambourine. Then they pick things up a little bit with The Word, which is a nice down and dirty rock song. It has a really catchy chorus with really tasty vocal harmonies. So already on side one, we've heard the addition of the sitar and the harmonium, so the instrumentation is clearly starting to get more exploratory. The side ends with a beautiful ballad called Michelle, which I think is a perfect conclusion to this side. I love the chord progression, the beautiful vocal harmonies, and between this song and Norwegian Wood, you can hear that the acoustic guitar writing is starting to get much more intricate. Some of the lyrics are also in French, which is really unique and experimental for the time. And I would say that the first side is pretty much perfect at this point, and the second side continues to deliver. Side 2 opens up with What Goes On, which is a nice easy rock song to bring us in, and then it continues with Girl, which is actually my favorite song on here. For whatever reason, something has always drawn me to this song. I love the harmonies in the chorus, and the beautiful vocal melody in the verses, and if you know music theory, the verse actually uses the harmonic minor scale in one part, which creates this really pretty, mysterious effect that I just love. Then we have I'm Looking Through You, which is a beautiful Paul McCartney love song that he wrote about the actress Jane Asher, who he had dated in the 60s. Then we get to In My Life, which is just such an incredible piece of work. This song is supposedly based off of John Lennon's past, kind of a reflection on some things from his past, which shows you the continued evolution of the topics that they continue to explore in their writing. The song also has a piano solo that's been sped up to sound like a harpsichord, which is a really unique sound and demonstrates George Martin's continued experimentation in the production. Then they pick it up a bit with Wait, which is a really solid rock song. This one actually shows the band's evolution in their harmony as well, with the use of slash chords in the verse. If you listen to the bass guitar, it stays on one note the whole time while the guitar chords continue to change on top of it, which is sort of a very general explanation of how some slash chords can work, but it's really cool to hear them get into some of that new harmonic territory in this song. Then we have I Needed Someone, which is George Harrison's second song on here. This is a pretty love song written about an English model that he married in the 60s named Patty Boyd. Then the album wraps up with Run For Your Life, which is a very interesting song. If you just listen to it musically and ignore the lyrics, it kind of just sounds like a straight-ahead rock song. But then when you pay attention to what he's saying, the lyrics are very threatening and vengeful towards whatever woman he's writing this to. And John Lennon later regretted writing this, and he actually said that this is his least favorite Beatles song. But devoid of the lyrics, I do think that stylistically this song does wrap up the album nicely. So between the new topics explored in the lyrics, the new instruments being incorporated, and just the overall change in the writing style, I think this is a very breakthrough album for the Beatles, and definitely one of the best in their catalog, so this one easily gets an S. Alright, now we have Revolver, and this one is definitely getting an S. I have two favorite Beatles albums, and this is one of them. I kind of fluctuate between the two depending on what mood I'm in, and I've never really been able to decide between the two, but I think this album is just absolutely incredible. They just took all the momentum that they had from Rubber Soul and just continued to expand on it with one amazing song after another, and at this point, they had stopped touring altogether and became strictly a studio band, so the focus on the writing rather than the performing creates a massive shift in their music and their sound. The album kicks off with Taxman, which is actually a politically driven song written by George Harrison. The song is attacking a British politician named Harold Wilson and his tax policies, and I think they're definitely making a statement by opening the album with a political piece, and I think this very clearly shows you that the old Beatles are gone and this is just a completely new chapter that we've entered. Then we have Eleanor Rigby, which takes a really beautiful dark turn. This song depicts what life was like in post-war Britain, and it's entirely comprised of just vocals and a large string section arranged by George Martin. After that, we have I'm Only Sleeping, which is my second favorite track on here. I just love the mood of this song and the beautiful vocal harmonies that happen in the background of the chorus. George Martin also takes the guitar solo and he reverses it, which is another new production technique that hadn't been implemented yet. Then we get to Love You Too, which is the first George Harrison song that's completely entrenched in his Indian music influences, much more so than Norwegian Wood. At this point, George was taking psychedelics and exploring different types of spiritual practices, so his songwriting was shifting significantly, but I really enjoy this phase of his writing. Then we get to Here, There, and Everywhere, which is my favorite song on here by far. Apparently, Paul McCartney was influenced by Brian Wilson's writing on God Only Knows, which makes a lot of sense for me because God Only Knows is one of my favorite songs of all time. But this is probably the most straight-ahead song so far up to this point, in the sense that, it's a love song and it's not using any of those exotic instruments that we had been hearing. But regardless of that, I think it just has such a beautiful vocal melody and a great chord progression, and it's just always been my favorite song on here. It's always stuck out to me. After that, we have the one song that I don't care for on this album. Yes, I am that guy, but I've just never been into Yellow Submarine. I've always thought that if this song was left out, then this album would be completely perfect. And it's nothing against Ringo either, because there are a lot of songs that he sings that I really do love, but this song has just really never done anything for me. But luckily, side 1 has one more track that picks it up with He Said, She Said. This is a nice driving rock song that was written by John and George, and the lyrics apparently have LSD influences as well. I think it's a great song and a great way to conclude side 1. Side 2 opens up with the awesome song Good Day Sunshine. I love the piano work that George Martin adds to this one, and I just love the overall vibe of this song. It's a nice combination of positivity, but with a little bit of goofiness thrown in there as well. After that, we have my third favorite song on here, And Your Bird Can Sing. This is a really beautiful John Lennon song. I really enjoy the distorted guitar harmonies in the main riff, and it's got a really pretty vocal melody against a great chord progression. Then we have an amazing breakup song written by Paul called For No One. I've always loved this song. It's got a really cool instrumentation with the clavichord doing the main chord progression. And then in the middle of the song, you have a gorgeous French horn solo, which is another new instrument that hadn't been incorporated yet. Then we have Dr. Robert, which is another song with very clear drug references, this time on the part of John Lennon. Dr. Robert is essentially a physician who prescribes feel-good drugs, so the drug references are popping up now between George and John. Not really Paul yet, but that will come in future albums. Then we have another George Harrison track called I Want to Tell You, and this one is another one that was inspired by LSD, so you're getting back-to-back drug songs, so the drug references are becoming much more prevalent at this point, and causing a massive shift in their writing style. Then we change up the vibe a bit with Got to Get You Into My Life. This is a really nice rocking one with an amazing brass section, almost similar to what you hear in groups like Chicago, Earth, Wind and Fire, and Tower of Power. This is another great addition to the sound, and I'm just loving everything that George Martin is bringing to the table at this point. I think his production is just, at its peak. Then they wrap the album up with another very drug-influenced song called Tomorrow Never Knows. This one incorporates the sitar again, as well as some tape loops that make it probably their most psychedelic song up to this point. Some of the lyrics are coming straight out of a 60s book called The Psychedelic Experience, so the drug references are becoming very overt at this point. They're not really hiding anything. I've always loved the drum groove on this one as well. I think Ringo's beats are also starting to get much cooler in these later albums. But I love this song, and I think it's a very cool way to wrap up this amazing album. This will always be my favorite Beatles album. This one easily gets an S. Okay, next we have Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and this one definitely gets an S. This is an absolutely incredible album, and I would say up to this point, this is probably the biggest shift in their evolution from one album to the next within just the songwriting and just the general experimentation and the production and instrumentation that they're incorporating. This one takes a turn into a much more psychedelic route, which makes a lot of sense because this was in '67, which was, the whole hippie movement, and it was really at its peak at that point. This is also their first concept album, which seems to be something that's up for debate within the Beatles community, but the general consensus seems to be that it's a concept album that isn't completely fleshed out throughout the entirety of the album. The beginning and the end of the album seem to be the two parts where the songs are interconnected in a concept album sort of fashion, while the middle of the album seems to be more individual tracks. Side 1 opens up with the title track, which is an awesome start and really sets the stage for the album. The idea came from Paul McCartney, where he had an image of each member of the band having an alter ego in a group called the Lonely Hearts Club Band, and they perform a show in front of an audience. The song then blends nicely into the second track, which is entitled With a Little Help from My Friends. I've always loved this song. It's got a really beautiful message and just an overall great vibe. Ringo does a great job on the vocals on this one as well. Then it gets much trippier with Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which a lot of people think is an LSD reference, but that myth has been debunked by both John and Paul. It was actually based off of a drawing that Julian Lennon had made of one of his classmates named Lucy, and he brought it home to his dad, and he described the picture as Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which gave the inspiration for the track. The song alternates between two time signatures, with the verse being in 3/4 and the chorus switching to 4/4, and these contrasts create a very psychedelic effect, especially when the drums in the chorus drop out and we hear that arpeggio pattern on the organ come back in. I always loved that sound. Then we have an amazing song called Getting Better. I love the production on this one. The bass is super full on the verses, and then the guitar part against the piano creates a really nice effect. Then they continue with Fixing a Hole, a really chill, psychedelic Paul McCartney track. The use of the harpsichord on this one really adds to the trippiness of the mood. The vocals are very pretty too, and I love that arpeggiated guitar riff that comes in at the end of each chorus. Then we have my favorite track on side 1 entitled She's Leaving Home. This one has such incredible instrumentation. It opens up with this beautiful harp line and then continues with these amazing string arrangements against the vocal melody. Also, you have these beautiful layered vocal parts throughout the song. At this point, too, I think it's clear that George Martin's production has just reached a whole nother level on this album. Side 1 then concludes with Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. This is a really amazing track that's mostly based off of a 19th century circus poster. We have a lot of cool things going on here. We have multiple kinds of organs going on, as well as some tape loops, and they're also bringing back some harmonica as well, which is something that we hadn't heard in a while. All of that combined with a really neat chord progression and a catchy vocal melody creates an extremely psychedelic effect on this one. So I have nothing but good things to say about side 1. At this point, the Beatles are just on the top of their game. Side 2 opens up with George's second Indian song entitled Within You, Without You. This time, in addition to the sitar, we're getting multiple Indian musicians doing percussion as well, which adds a really nice touch. I really appreciate George's willingness to explore different cultures and incorporate it into the Beatles' sound. I think these songs always add some nice diversity to the albums that they're on. Then we have When I'm 64, which is probably the most upbeat, poppy song on here at this point, although the second section does get much darker. I love the use of clarinets and the tubular bells on this one, and the vocal melody is very catchy. The next track is Lovely Rita. This one is more of a straight-ahead rock song written about a female traffic warden. I like the contrast between the verse and the chorus on this one, and George Martin takes an amazing piano solo as well. Then we have my favorite song on the album, Good Morning, Good Morning. Something about this song just really gets me going. I love the driving nature of the groove and the change in the beat between the first and second section, where in the second section, Ringo does those eighth note triplets on the hi-hat. It also has some amazing sax and brass parts with a great guitar solo on George's part. This was one of those songs where the more I listened to it, the more I liked it. Then they bring back the title track of the album as a reprise, and at this point it seems like the concept album theme is coming back because they're bringing back the theme from the beginning and reintroducing it at the end. Then the album concludes with a beautiful ballad entitled A Day in the Life. It goes through a couple different moods. It starts off much more melancholy, and the lyrics show John Lennon reflecting on different news articles that he's reading and kind of illustrating the climate of the world that he was living in. And then for the second section, it gets much more upbeat, and the topic shifts over to Paul reflecting on his childhood activities. And then they bring back the first section again, with John continuing to reflect on more news articles that he's reading. After that, they have this big crescendo, which ends with a massive chord played on multiple keyboards, and it sustains for a very long time. And then that chord is followed by some talking samples that are repeated and reversed on top of each other. And I just think this is an amazing end to an amazing album. And in all honesty, this could be my favorite Beatles album, depending on what mood I'm in. But at the current time that I'm making this video, my two favorites are Revolver and then the other album that has yet to be discussed. But this album is incredible. This definitely gets an S. Next, we have Magical Mystery Tour, and this one easily gets an S. This is my other favorite Beatles album, tied with Revolver. Like I said, it really depends on the mood that I'm in. If I'm in a more psychedelic mood, then this is the one that I'll go for. And if I'm in more of a straight-ahead rock mood, I'll go for Revolver. Altogether, we have 11 songs. Side 1 has 6 songs that were written for a TV film of the same title, which stars the Beatles. The film depicts people on a coach tour having strange experiences caused by magicians. So it's following the psychedelic theme of the previous couple albums, which is definitely my favorite sound of the Beatles. The album opens up with the title track, Magical Mystery Tour, which is a nice driving rock song with a big brass section, and the song really sets the stage for the story that will follow in the film. Then it slows things down a bit with the beautiful Paul McCartney ballad, The Fool on the Hill. This song depicts a character who is wise, but he isn't really taken seriously by his peers. And according to Paul, the character could have been based off of Maharishi, who was an Indian guru who taught the Beatles meditation. This song has really beautiful piano chords in the verse, and then the harmony takes a darker turn in the chorus, which creates this really interesting contrast. I also love the touch that the flute and the recorders add to this one. And then we change moods a bit again with a chill instrumental blues called Flying. I love the production on this one, as well as the instrumentation with the mellotron and the Hammond organ. It also has a really catchy vocal melody that they all sing in unison, which creates a really cool sound. Then for the remainder of side one, they hit us with one amazing song after another, starting with a George Harrison piece called Blue Jay Way, which has always been a favorite of mine. I think it's easily one of the most psychedelic Beatles songs ever written. Music theory-wise, the vocal melody has some really interesting things going on where he starts out by singing a diminished arpeggio, and then he resolves it up a half step into a major chord, giving us this really awesome kind of mysterious sound. Instrumentally, it has a beautiful ringy Hammond organ that creates this effect very similar to the kind of sounds that you hear on Dark Side of the Moon. During the chorus, they add a cello and they put an effect on the vocals that kind of sounds like a phaser or a flanger or something like that, which just adds on more and more layers to the psychedelic sounds. Everything George Martin is doing here is just completely spotless in my opinion. Then we have Your Mother Should Know, which is another incredible piece. Super catchy vocal melodies, a beautiful chord progression on the piano. They're also using the Hammond organ on this one as well during the instrumental middle sections, which makes the song, a little bit more trippy. And then side one wraps up with I Am the Walrus, which is just a perfect conclusion to this side. This is another very psychedelic song. Apparently, it was based off of 2 different acid trips that John Lennon had, and The Walrus is based off of a poem by Lewis Carroll entitled The Walrus and the Carpenter. This one has some of my favorite George Martin string arrangements to date. The chord voicings within the string section are super full sounding, and then the parts that are happening underneath the vocal lines complement it perfectly, and it doesn't interfere at all. They're also using a lot more psychedelic vocal effects and a lot of cool samples, and I just think this is a great last song for side one. Side one is just incredible so far, and side two just continues to deliver. So side two starts off with Hello Goodbye. This is another really pretty Paul McCartney track. This one kind of has a nice mix of the poppier side that we get from earlier Beatles stuff, but also mixed in with the newer psychedelic production that they've been utilizing. We have some strings again as well with the viola section, and the strings add a really nice touch to all of these songs. Then we have the incredible John Lennon track, Strawberry Fields Forever. The instrumentation is very trippy on this one with the opening part on the mellotron, and then the combination of the brass section, the cello section, and some Latin percussion throughout the song as well. Music theory-wise, there's some interesting stuff happening here as well with the vocal melody, with the utilization of the altered scale over the G7 chord when he says the lyrics, "Nothing is real." The album continues with another amazing Paul McCartney number entitled Penny Lane. This is another one of my favorites on here. This one has some more of that poppy vibe as well, but the chord progression is much more intricate and it moves through multiple different keys. I've always loved Paul's sense of harmony. Most of the time when there's a Beatles song that has a chord progression that I really like, it usually ends up being written by Paul. And then next we have Baby You're a Rich Man. This song also uses slash chords, similar to what I had mentioned from Wait on Rubber Soul. So if you listen to the verse, the bass notes are staying the same while the chords are changing on top of it. This song actually also has Mick Jagger doing background vocals, which I wasn't aware of. That was surprising to find out. Then the album wraps up with the classic hit All You Need Is Love. This one's always been a favorite of mine. Amazing orchestration on George Martin's part, amazing lyrics, and as far as I know, this is the first Beatles song to use an odd time signature during the verses, which the verses are in 7/4 time. So what that means is if you're able to count the beats of the song, if you count the verse out, it lines up in 7 as opposed to 4. And I also love how they keep repeating the love is all you need part at the end, and they gradually keep layering stuff on top of it as it fades out. I think it's just a great end to a great album, and yeah, this one easily gets an S. Okay, now we have the White Album, and this one's gonna get an A. I like this one, but not as much as the previous four. This is their first release after taking a band trip to India in '68, where they studied transcendental meditation. And at this point, there was a lot of conflict and disarray in the band when they got back, and I think you can hear some of that throughout certain parts of this album. This one's a double album, so we have four sides. And I will say that I really do like the first two sides a lot more than the last two. Particularly the third side is the one that kind of loses it for me. And if they had kept it to a single album, it might have been up in the S category as well. Similar to Revolver, it starts out with a political piece called Back in the USSR, which is basically a parody of Chuck Berry's song Back in the USA, basically just taking his sense of patriotism to the United States and transferring it over to Russia. Then we have an amazing song called Dear Prudence, which was inspired by a woman named Prudence Farrow, who they had met on the trip to India in '68. And you're going to see more and more songs have inspiration from that trip throughout this album. And she had become obsessed with meditating while they were practicing under Maharishi. And this song also uses an interesting chord, which is a B flat major 7 sharp 5, a chord that's rarely ever heard in rock music. So if you're listening to it, it's the fourth chord of the descending progression that you hear in the main guitar part when the vocals come in. So it's cool to hear their sense of harmony continue to evolve. Then we have Glass Onion, which is just a nice, solid rock song. Amazing string arrangements on George Martin's part. And apparently John Lennon wrote this one just to confuse people who like to really read into their songs and try to find hidden meanings. Then they picked the vibe up a bit with Oobla Dee Oobla Da. This one is very upbeat and cute sounding. It kind of sounds like a song that's geared towards kids. But it has a really nice piano part, and I really love the woodwind arrangements on this one. Then we have Wild Honey Pie, which is just a quick 50-second song that Paul wrote, where he was just trying to experiment with some sounds and see what he could come up with. Originally, they were considering leaving this one off of the album, but George's wife, Pattie Boyd, liked it so much, so they just left it on for her. Then we have the continuing story of Bungalow Bill, another experimental number, and this is the first song to feature Yoko Ono doing some vocal parts as well. After that, we have one of George's most popular songs, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which features Eric Clapton doing the lead guitar parts. I love this song, and I love the switch from the minor to the major key going between the verse and the chorus. A big difference that you're seeing now on this album is that they're having some guest appearances, and you see that, like, on side one we just saw the introduction of Yoko Ono and Eric Clapton. Side one ends with Happiness is a Warm Gun, which is my second favorite track on this album. I love the vibe of the first section with those dark, lush guitar chords and the beautiful vocal harmonies, and then it continues with two different sections that kind of change up the feel and the tempo, which creates a really nice contrast throughout the song. Side 2 opens up with an awesome song called Martha My Dear. This is another one of those Paul songs that has a really nice chord progression in the piano part, a lot of movement between different keys, and I love the brass and string sections as well. Then we have a beautiful John Lennon song called I'm So Tired. This one was written about him struggling with insomnia during their trip to India, and the song just depicts that feeling of being sleepy perfectly, completely captures that essence. After that, they go to Blackbird, which is a classic that everyone loves. Then we have another George Harrison number called Piggies. This is a satirical song about greed and consumerism. I love the harpsichord in this one. It almost gives it like a classical sort of sound. And then they have Rocky Raccoon, which is a really pretty song that Paul wrote, and this was one of his songs that he wrote while he was in India. And after that, we have a nice surprise with Ringo Starr's first composition entitled Don't Pass Me By. It's a pretty simple song. It has a little chord part in the piano with some violin melodies on top of it. I don't mind it. I think it's a pretty good song. Then we have another shorter Paul McCartney song called Why Don't We Do It in the Road. This is another one that was inspired on the India trip, and it was from Paul seeing two monkeys having sex in the streets of India, which led to the title and the lyrics of this one. Then we have another shorter song called I Will. I like this one a lot. It's more of a folky vibe, but I think it fits really well with the other songs on this side. Side 2 ends with a beautiful John Lennon number called Julia. This one was written for his mother, Julia Lennon, and I just love this song. I'm a big fan of John Lennon's solo stuff, and I think this one kind of gives you a little taste of what's to come in his 70s albums. So like I said, if the album ended here, I would probably give it an S. I think the mood is fairly consistent with more sad, melancholy songs, and then a few upbeat, happy tracks kind of sprinkled throughout. But then I feel like the mood kind of gets all over the place on the next side, and it kind of loses me a little bit. So yeah, let's go to that one right now. So side 3 opens up with Birthday, which establishes a much more poppy, upbeat vibe. And then it goes to Your Blues, which is like a very down and dirty, slow blues. And after that, we go to Mother Nature's Son, which is an acoustic, folky Paul McCartney piece that I really like a lot. So far, I'm having a hard time kind of establishing what the mood of this side is going to be. And I think a lot of that could have just been the conflict in the band at that time, creating maybe some difficulties in the whole writing and recording process with this album. Then we get to a more straight-ahead rock song with Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, which is actually a song John wrote about him and Yoko Ono. And then we have Sexy Sadie. This is a song John wrote about Maharishi when he had found out that he was accused of allegedly making sexual advancements on some woman when they were on their India trip. Then we get to Helter Skelter, which is an amazing song, one of the heaviest Beatles songs I think they've ever written, which was Paul's intentions when writing this. And as a lot of you probably know, Charles Manson read into this song a little too much, and he thought that the song's meaning was about a race war, which kind of creates this dark underbelly that surrounds the song, unfortunately. I've seen a documentary where they were talking about the Manson murders, and they were saying that some of the murders that they committed, they would take the blood and they would write Helter Skelter on the wall. So unfortunately, that has kind of become part of the legacy of this song, but it definitely wasn't the intentions of Paul, obviously. Side 3 wraps up with Long, 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 which is another George Harrison track, probably my favorite on this side. This one was also written while they were in India, and it has much more of a laid-back, folky sort of vibe. This is another one of those songs that I think probably would have fit better on the first or second side. I think putting it right after Helter Skelter kind of creates this really bizarre contrast that seems a little bit kind of forced to me. So with side 3, it still has songs that I like, but as far as listening goes, I feel like it's hard for me to get any momentum going when I'm listening to it because you're getting so many different moods that constantly keep changing, and this is really the side that makes this album go down to an A for me. Side 4 opens up with Revolution 1. This is another political piece where John is commenting on, the need for social change, but his doubts on whether or not violence is the way to achieve it. There's 3 versions of this song, and I prefer the faster version that was released as a B-side to Hey Jude, and most people seem to agree with that. I always wished that that was the version that they included on here. Then we have Honey Pie, which is an incredible Paul McCartney song. I love the piano chords on this one. It almost reminds me of like Billy Joel or Elton John. Paul also arranged the saxophone and clarinet arrangements himself for this one, which I think is really respectful. Then we have Savoy Truffle, which is an awesome track. This one always reminded me of Abbey Road. I think it would have fit really well on that album as well. Really cool sax arrangements and just an overall great vibe. Then we have a beautiful John Lennon ballad called Cry Baby Cry. So I would say up to now, side 4 I'm enjoying a lot more than side 3. It just seems a lot more cohesive to me. Then we have Revolution 9, which is the one song that feels out of place to me on here. It's basically an 8-minute experimental track where everyone is doing different things with tape loops, spoken word, and a lot of other sound effects. I think if they did an experimental album that consisted mostly of stuff like this, it would be much more fitting, but in this context, it seems kind of random and out of place to me, especially considering the fact that they're putting it in as the second to last song. It just kind of creates a weird shift in the momentum on this 4th side. Alright, so now I'm going to surprise everyone and say that this last song, Good Night, is my favorite song on here and also probably my favorite final song of any Beatles album. This is a beautiful song that John wrote as a lullaby for his son, and Ringo is the only Beatle featured on this track doing lead vocals. There's a beautiful orchestra backing him up, arranged by George Martin, and then there's a group called the Mike Samms Singers doing backing vocals. I hope I pronounced that right. But this is one of my favorite Beatles songs of all time, and one of their most underrated songs in my opinion. It's just so beautiful, and the orchestrations are just so rich and so full, and I think it wraps up the album perfectly, especially at the very end when everything drops down and he whispers "Good night, everybody." It's just so pretty. But yeah, like I said, this album is definitely great. It's got a ton of songs that I love. It's just that third side that kind of loses it for me and brings it down to an A. And I'm curious if other people feel the same way, because I know a lot of people think this is one of their best albums. So let me know what you think on that one. But yeah, this one is going to get an A. Okay, now we have Abbey Road, and I'm going to give this one an S, another amazing album. Now, although this was released before Let It Be, this was actually the last album that they recorded. And at this point, there was just so much conflict in the group that they were pretty much on the verge of breaking up. I like the vibe of this album. It's less psychedelic than the previous couple, but it still has a lot of new stuff going on and a ton of amazing songs. Side 1 opens strong with Come Together, which is a classic that everyone loves, and then they slow it down a bit with a beautiful George Harrison tune called Something. This is one of my all-time favorites of George. Amazing lyrics, great chord progression, a nice key change going into the second section, and just an overall beautiful mood. Then they change gears a bit with a poppier song by Paul entitled Maxwell's Silver Hammer. This one has a really nice chord progression in the piano and utilizes some really cool synthesizer and organ sounds. Then we have Oh Darling, which is the one song on here that I never really cared for. I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that one, but for some reason this song just really never did anything for me. It could just be another one of those songs that I've just heard way too many times at this point. After that, we have Octopus's Garden, which is my favorite song that Ringo wrote. This one has a beautiful, catchy vocal melody with a nice chord progression in the guitar, and I love the piano parts that come in during the second section. Then side 1 concludes with one of their heaviest songs to date, called I Want You, She's So Heavy. I remember the first time I heard this song was on the radio, and I remember tuning in halfway through the song where they keep repeating that heavy section in the middle, and my friend told me that it was the Beatles, and I thought he was messing with me at first. I mean, I couldn't believe how heavy this was for the Beatles. The contrast between the heavy section and the bluesier section also fit really well together, in my opinion. From a harmony perspective, they're also using a dominant 7 flat 9 chord in the heavier section, which is a really cool chord and something that you don't typically hear very often in rock music. I think this is a great track to end side 1. Side 2 opens with the beautiful George Harrison classic entitled Here Comes the Sun. Both songs that George contribute to this album are absolutely incredible. Then they change gears with a much darker track entitled Because. I love the effect they get by taking that arpeggiated part in the harpsichord and doubling it on the guitar, and then putting the beautiful vocal harmonies on top of it. This song has a very eerie, haunting quality to it, and I just love it. Then we have a Paul song called You Never Give Me Your Money. This song is very cool. It goes through a wide range of feels and emotions. It starts out much more mellow, and then the tempo picks up for the second part, and then it slows back down a bit, and has these beautiful vocal harmonies against these arpeggios in the guitar. After that, we have my favorite song from side 2, entitled Sun King. This one just has such a nice relaxed mood to it with these pretty guitar arpeggios against a single note guitar line that has a little bit of tremolo on top of it. And then halfway through, the harmony changes and we have these really beautiful vocal harmonies on top of it. After that, they go to a quick minute-long John Lennon track called Mean Mr. Mustard, which is another one that was written during their trip to India. And that's followed by a stream of shorter songs that are ranging from 1 to 2 minutes each that all kind of interconnect with one another. And this is a fantastic conclusion to the album. I think it's really smooth and I think they pull it off really well. It starts with Polythene Pam, which is another John Lennon song written while he was in India, and it connects right into She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, which is a Paul McCartney song. This one has more of a concrete ending to it, and then it goes into Golden Slumbers, which has this beautiful piano pattern with an awesome string section underneath it, and then it connects right into Carry That Weight, which has a really catchy vocal melody, and it brings back the main part of You Never Give Me Your Money in the middle section, which is a very cool way of interconnecting the songs and bringing back earlier parts of the album. Then we have my second favorite track on this side, entitled The End. This one has really cool instrumental sections that eventually lead into the main vocal part where he says, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make, which I think is an incredible line to wrap the album up with, and a very good message for all of us just to keep in the back of our minds. After that, there's a little 25-second hidden folky acoustic track called Her Majesty. I like that they include a hidden track on here. I'm not sure how common it was to do that at that time, but I appreciate the fact that they did do it. So all in all, I think this is an incredible album. Like I said, it's not as psychedelic, but it does have a great overall vibe to it, and it's filled with a lot of amazing songs. So this one definitely is going to get an S. Okay, now we get to the final release, Let It Be, and I'm going to give this one an A. I like this album a lot, but I do prefer Let It Be Naked. So if you don't know the history, they still had George Martin on here, but then they also brought in Phil Spector to do some reproducing and final mixing. And then way down the road in 2003, Paul had initiated a project of re-releasing Let It Be with the original stripped-down production style and the original track list, which was very different from what we hear on here. And while I am a huge Phil Spector fan, I do prefer Let It Be Naked from a production standpoint, and I do think the track listing is significantly better. But since I'm scoring all of the original Beatles albums, I'm just going to go off of the 1970 release with the original track listing for this one. So side one opens up with an acoustic folky Paul McCartney track entitled Two of Us. I've always loved this one. It's got a really nice peaceful mood to it, and I think the folk rock stuff is a style that they always pull off really well. And then we go to Dig a Pony. This is a cool track written by John. It's also one of the 5 songs that they perform on their final rooftop concert in '69. It features Billy Preston on electric piano, and this one has like a nice 70s rock sort of vibe. It actually kind of reminds me of a song that would be on a Paul McCartney solo album, so I was surprised to find out that John wrote this one. Then we have Across the Universe, which is one of my favorites on here. Such a beautiful, mellow track. This one was written during that whole period when John was studying the Transcendental Meditation. And John actually said in an interview that he thinks this is one of the most poetic songs that he's ever written. Then we have a George Harrison track called I, Me, Mine. This is an emotional one that's commenting on the conflict within the band and how the ego just creates so many different problems when you're trying to deal with other people. Then we have a little 50-second filler song called Dig It. This is an example of where I prefer Let It Be Naked, because on that album they just take this track out altogether and replace it with Don't Let Me Down, which I much prefer. That was a decision on Phil Spector's part to leave this in there, and I wish he had left it in because I think it would have kept the momentum going a lot more on side one. And Don't Let Me Down is just such an amazing song. I don't really know why you would leave that out of the last album. After that, we have the title track, Let It Be, written by Paul. This is a classic that everyone loves. It's got a really beautiful message on just learning to let things go and have faith in the fact that everything will be all right in the end. I do prefer the George Martin mix for this one as well. It has a really beautiful orchestral section added to it that I think just makes the song pop even more. They conclude side one with a short cover song, and they hadn't done covers since the Help album at this point, and this one is called Maggie May, which is a traditional Liverpool folk song, and I like this song, but I wish it wasn't so short. It's another one of those 40-second songs, and I don't think I would mind it as much if they didn't choose to end the side with it, but I think it's kind of an abrupt way to end side one. You know, I'm listening to it and I'm waiting for the song to continue, and then it just kind of suddenly ends and the side is over. This was another track that was omitted from Let It Be Naked, which is another reason why I like it more. And then side 2 opens up with another song from the rooftop concert called I've Got a Feeling. This is a nice mid-tempo bluesy rock song, and it's a combination of 2 unfinished songs, the first one being I've Got a Feeling by Paul, and the second one being Everybody's Had a Hard Year by John. Then we have another rooftop track called One After 909, which is actually a song that they had written over 10 years ago. So this is a bluesier song, and this one definitely brings back some of those earlier Beatles sounds, and I think this was a nice touch to put onto the album since it is their last album, and they're giving you, a little bit of that early sound that they started from. Next we have my favorite song on here, The Long and Winding Road. Just such a beautiful song that's reminiscent of the growing tensions that are happening within the group. This is the one song where I do prefer the Phil Spector version. Ironically, it sounds more like George Martin to me because it has this really nice string arrangement, while the Let It Be Naked version is a little bit more stripped down, but the string arrangements make it for me, and I really love what Phil Spector did with this song. Then we have a bluesy acoustic track written by George called For You Blue. I really like the vibe of this one, and I love the effect of the lap steel guitar played by John. And then the album ends with Get Back. So this is another example of where I prefer Let It Be Naked, because on that album they open with Get Back and they close with Let It Be, and I think that was the much better choice. I love Get Back, but I think it functions much better as an opening track as opposed to an ending. I think when you listen to Let It Be Naked, it just brings the listener in right off the bat with that nice guitar riff and that drum groove, and it just sets the stage for the album. And then I think choosing to end with a more sentimental song like Let It Be is a much better way to tie everything up and kind of give the Beatles that final farewell in a more emotional tone as opposed to the more rocking sound of Get Back. So all in all, I do love this album, and I think it's a great final release for the Beatles. If I was rating Let It Be Naked, I would give it an S, but because of the few things that I had mentioned with the 1970 release, I'm going to bump this one down a tier and give it an A. And that's about it. So we covered a lot of information, and like I said, if I got anything wrong, please let me know and I'll correct it. I've been enjoying making these a lot, so I plan on doing more. So if there are any other bands or artists that you think might be good for this, feel free to leave me some suggestions in the comments. And check out the other tier lists that I've made so far. I'll put links in the description. But thanks a lot for you guys watching this. I really do appreciate it, and I look forward to everyone's feedback. So yeah, I will see you guys at the next video. Take care.